mission of God has always been about people, the people of the world. We understand from John 3:16 that God so loved the world. And as you've heard me already say, God is the God of all people. We have this unique story in Genesis chapter 10 and 11 about the Tower of Babel. And what we see in that story is God created ethnic diversity, that he loves ethnic diversity. And in that confusing moment in biblical history, he created what we have today, many, many peoples from one people. But then we have this unique story in Genesis chapter 12 of 1 through 3, where God calls Abraham. Now, God called Abraham not to become an exclusive people of God, but he called Abraham for him and his family to be God's instrument of redemption, to reach all this new diverse people groups of the world. And he told Abraham, if you obey me, and I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And here's the lesson from all this. For me and for you as followers of Jesus, we are blessed to be a blessing. And our blessing has this very specific focus, and that is to reach the people of the world.
Well, in LiveSent, we get to see the mission and the people of the world. Understand that God never loses his focus on ethnic diversity. Jesus, the Jewish Messiah, was raised in Galilee, and his ministry centered in the region called Galilee of the Gentiles, an area less than 20% Jewish. Most of Jesus' disciples were from Galilee. Paul was called to be an apostle to the Gentiles. Peter, an uneducated fisherman from Galilee, was called to be the apostle to the Jews. Understand that the Western church, like the early church, struggles with ethnocentrism. What that means is that we struggle to see past our own embedded cultural paradigms. We struggle to integrate with others of a different culture. We struggle to help people of other cultures understand our culture and integrate into it. Our identity is often misplaced. Understand that we are citizens of heaven, children of the living God, called to be saints in the land of America. But here's the question: are we American Christians or Christ followers who live in America? Like Peter and Paul, God will purposefully dislodge us from the very people and places where we tend to hide and find comfort. And understand that in the eternal future, before the throne of God, the peoples of the world are recognized as distinct. That's Revelations 5 and 7.
Our mission has to do with peoples, not geography. The focus on peoples brings clarity to the mission. Places with geographically defined boundaries are not the focus of the mission. The mission is to make disciples of all ethnic groups. The prophet Jonah was limited in his understanding of God's heart for all people. His heart was filled with prejudice. Geopolitical dramas that play out in our day, unfortunately, have influenced the Western church, creating fear and prejudice as well. Understanding the people focus of the mission opens the doors to limitless opportunities. Globalization is God's idea, plan, and strategy to use his church globally to make disciples of all nations right in their communities. There are 70 million displaced people globally, displaced to regions where they now have access to the gospel of Christ. If the local church in those locations will respond. There are 16,000 linguistic and culturally distinct people groups globally, among the 7.8 billion people in the world. There are over 6,000 people groups that are still unreached with the gospel. That represents 3.5 billion who have no access to the gospel. Most of these 3.5 billion have never even met a Christian, but they more than likely have experienced the thirst-quenching ability of a Coke. Coca-Cola is reaching more people than the gospel.
What does it mean to be unreached or unengaged? There are some missions terms that helps us as the church to better understand how effective we've been for the last 2,000 plus years. When we hear the term unreached, that describes a group of people with no identifiable community of believers with adequate resources to reproduce itself. When we hear the term unengaged, that describes not only the unreached, but there is not significant contact with witnessing believers and no disciples being made. Finally, the terms least reached. That describes any people group where there is less than 2% whom are believers. The nations are here in Kansas City, and they are continuing to come. Many unreached people groups have wound up in Kansas City due to things such as war, genocide, or other upheavals. We routinely interact and minister to many people groups, but have been putting our focus primarily on refugees. But did you know there are also other people groups like the over 12 different groups from the country of India? They are now living here in Kansas City. We've made friends with students, have numerous leaders in our church who are interacting with the Indian group, and also support American missionaries living and working in India. And we are now taking missions trips into different parts of India. All of this gives us the opportunity to fulfill our role in the church, fulfilling Jesus' commands.